Welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast. Gareth here. I interviewed Kevin Goldsmith, the CTO of Onfido, who are an identity verification provider based in London. However, as it was a lockdown recording, Kevin was at home in Seattle. He got over there just in time. We covered everything from his early days as a software developer, going on to software architecture, working for the likes of Microsoft, Spotify and Adobe, all at times when these organizations were experiencing unprecedented levels of scale. He's been doing this a long time. He's been doing this type of thing for 25 plus years, and he's got some great anecdotes and perspectives on a number of issues that we're currently facing. Really fascinating guy. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. It's Kevin Goldsmith. Kevin Goldsmith, thank you for coming on the show. It's an honour to talk to you, and you've obviously joined us from your home in Seattle. I thought it was San Francisco. I put the bridge on in the background to impress you, and I got the city completely wrong. So I do apologise for that. But thank you for coming on. I know you're a busy chap. You obviously work in London normally. You've headed back to Seattle to be with your family through the lockdown period. Yeah. So I do appreciate it. Let's just jump straight in then. Give us a broader overview of who you are, and how you got to where you are right now with Onfido.
Sure. So I am the Chief Technology Officer at Onfido. I joined the company about a year and a month ago. I've been a Chief Technology Officer and sort of senior technology leader now for a few years. Been really just focusing the last few years in CTO type roles. But I started, of course, as a developer. I went to university for computer science. I graduated actually in the very first undergraduate class in computer science at Carnegie Mellon University, which is a pretty good CS school. From there, I went to the Bay Area. So I started in the Bay Area and worked for a company called Silicon Graphics, which if you're a bit older, you know, because they were the computer graphics hardware company. Now they're just a tiny little server company sadly. But I was really a graphics person. I started doing computer graphics, first at Silicon Graphics. I went into film production. I did software in a film studio in San Francisco. And then I moved up to Seattle, and I came to go work at Microsoft Research right as Microsoft Research was starting. So I spent 5 years there as a developer primarily, but then as a lead, kind of in my very first real management job in Microsoft Research, building multi-user virtual environment platforms, which was a big thing in the mid to late 90s. Now mostly gone, just games now. But so that was my first kind of management job. And at the time, I wasn't really wanting to be kind of a leader. I was really just wanting to make sure that I was one of the first developers on the team. I ended up owning a big chunk of stuff, and then I wanted to make sure it was done correctly. So I didn't want somebody else in charge of it. So really the worst reason to be a manager at all. And then so after that role, I kind of moved back into being a developer in the Windows Media team, and then left Microsoft, did some startups, ended back in sometimes in a leadership role, sometimes in a just senior developer role. Went back to Microsoft after the sort of 2001 .com explosion happened. Went back to Microsoft on the Windows team as a developer, was back at Microsoft for a couple of years, and then went to Adobe, where I spent 9 years. First as senior developer, then engineering manager, then senior engineering manager, then director. Somewhere at Adobe, I really decided, you know what, actually, not only do I want to do this job, but I actually want to take it seriously. I kind of had really good mentors there and learned what the job really was and really started to care about it. So kind of moved up through into more senior management at Adobe, and then this little company from Sweden called me, Spotify, in 2013. So at the time, I've been trying to figure out how to scale Agile within my organization a little bit better, and I'd had some ideas and was doing some stuff. And Spotify approached me, and they had just started. They'd just started doing this thing called tribes and squads. And they sent me this, as part of the interviewing, they sent me this document that they just published, but nobody really knew about it. And to describing it, and I read that, and I'm like, wow, this is really different. This is really interesting. I went to Sweden, I interviewed with the team and said, I have to be here. I just have to see how this really works in practice. They're taking ideas I was just playing with and have really scaled them. So I went to work for Spotify. I was there in Stockholm with my family for 3 years. Got to the point there where I was now VP of engineering. I was running 3 tribes. I was what we call an alliance lead, or what was called an alliance lead. And I was kind of ready to move from being sort of one of the senior technology leaders to being CTO, and the company back in Seattle was interested in having me come and do that. So I moved back to Seattle with my family. Was CTO at a company called Avo, which was a legal marketplace. Did that for a couple of years. We sold that company and moved on. Did a stint helping out a local startup get off the ground, and then Avo approached me, and I was kind of ready to go back into being in a bit of a bigger startup, and that precipitated a move to London. So that's kind of the very long version of my short history, I guess.
Well, I would call it a short version of a reasonably long.
Fair enough.
I'm calling you old, but I think it was.
Yeah, right.
You've had a very distinguished career. You worked at some of the big players and companies who really changed the world, I suppose. Let's unpack that a little bit then. So.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Microsoft in the early days. It must have been a pretty exciting place to be in the mid-90s. Yeah, you must have learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was, Microsoft was at the time like the biggest, most profitable software company in the world. And Microsoft Research was an interesting way for me to join it, because at the time, Microsoft Research was brand new. I was literally one of the very first hires into Microsoft Research. And so, you had the benefit of being part of this really, really big company with tons of resources and access to all these people using your software. And at the same time, though you were in this kind of nascent kind of new area where you also had a lot of freedom to explore and to try different things. And so I was extremely lucky to be kind of in that environment at that time. But it was also just kind of a great time to join the company. I literally joined, I think, a few weeks before Windows 95 launched, right? So I remember like one of my first days at the company showing up, and they had the big tent. They launched Windows 95 from a big tent on the campus with like a big event, and I just showed up one day and that was there, and I didn't even realize it. My first machine, I went from using these like Silicon Graphics, like $75,000, $100,000 workstations running Unix to running Windows 3.1, like on a PC as my main dev machine.
Yeah.
And then Windows 95. But I was there for all this really great innovation that the company did at the time. So I got to work for Bill. Before Steve took over, I got to be there for the Bill to Steve transition. Yeah. So, the way the company did stuff, there's a lot at the time I wasn't super happy about. It was an extremely waterfall, very old school way of building software, but at the same time, that was kind of how it was done then. So I'm glad I had that experience, and it was a culture that was a really kind of interesting corporate culture, very competitive, very, I would say, kind of cutthroat. But it was also, it worked for the company at the time. The company was extremely successful working that way. So I got to kind of learn there and see what it's like to build software at massive scale, but then also learn some of the things that don't necessarily work that well. Some of the things I decided, I'm glad I've had this experience, but I'm not sure I want to do this myself in future. And so it was a good education in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you how big was Microsoft when you joined there then? Are we talking like a couple of hundred people or?
Oh, no. So because I joined in 94, when I joined, I think there was maybe 18,000 employees already.
Oh, wow. So they were already massive. So the year Microsoft you joined was quite new, though, you said, yeah?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I joined Microsoft Research, there was maybe a dozen people in it. And it later became, 1,000 people. I don't even know what the size it is now, probably multiple thousands of people. But when I joined, I was in a new team in a new division, our Christmas party, I remember my first Christmas party was with like Nathan Myhrvold, who was a VP, his like admins and us at a kind of big table at a restaurant. Like that was the first year Christmas party, right? For Microsoft Research. So, we could all comfortably get into a big room when I joined. But also, when I joined Microsoft, it seemed ridiculously large at 18,000. When I left Microsoft, it was over 100,000. Right. So, it seemed massive.
I can imagine that's still astronomical growth, even though you started at a pretty high base point anyway. But I mean, they went from being a successful technology company to a change the world type company, didn't they? I think Windows 95 was the big moment for them, I think, wasn't it? That's when they really when they really pushed on, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, no, Windows 95 was an absolute game changer as far as just ease of use and really making things available that anyone could approach and make it a lot easier for people just to use technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you left there, then you obviously jumped straight into a startup. That must have been a hell of a culture shock.
So, after being, my team, so the team I was in Microsoft Research, I was the first non-manager hire, right? So it was me, a director and an engineering manager, and I was the first developer. My team went from sort of zero, me and the three of us to around 30, 40 people and sort of grew. So I was kind of used, and we were building like a whole platform. So for Microsoft, we were a very, very small team. But I got tired of, honestly, I was ready to do something very, very different because I was kind of used to, I went from this little research team to Windows Media, and Windows Media being several hundred people and, all the bureaucracy, all the being part of Windows. Like I broke the Windows build once, like that was never break the Windows build, like because it was a multi-week build.
Yeah.
Right. So, when I did that, like all of a sudden I started getting, first my manager came by my office, then the director came by my office, then the VP called me, then another VP called me. As I'm trying to fix it, I'm getting, because I've basically killed all of Microsoft at that point. And, I was kind of ready to do something at a very, very different scale. And at the time, so, when I joined the industry, there weren't really startups, right? It was really, there were every company was a big company. You couldn't really get capital. And there were companies kind of certainly in the Bay Area that were smaller, but it wasn't like today. And that mid to late 90s kind of growth of startups was really like a very different kind of world. And I was very excited to try and get into that world and to do things in a smaller way and to grow something from the beginning, having just kind of done that at Microsoft and then been in a much bigger group. So I was really excited to kind of switch gears and do something different.
So what do you think's triggered that startup revolution then? What was it, with all this VC funding coming in, people leaving the likes of Microsoft, IBM, setting up startups? The Bay Area was littered with new startups. Obviously, the dot-com boom bubble was starting to inflate. What was it like around that? What do you think started that? And what was that like to be involved in that?
Well, I think you had these kind of bigger companies, not just Microsoft and Seattle, but you had, HP and Sun and Oracle, Silicon Graphics, all these big Bay Area companies now getting to a size where, some of the folks who'd either been early on or joined later and now were big part of these big things had their own ideas. Plus you had some of the early folks leaving those companies with money and able to start funding new companies, either their own or help to fund others. So it was really this growth of venture capital and money to invest in these companies. And then once a few started going and people realized that this was a reasonable thing to do, it just kind of snowballed on itself. And, from my perspective, from my vantage point, kind of safely ensconced at Microsoft, I was very much aware of this happening, but it wasn't as big a presence in Seattle. It was more of a Bay Area thing. And then it started to happen in Seattle. You started to see more of these things happen, and you started to see them get funded where you realized, oh, I can do this. And actually this might, there's all these companies doing really, really interesting things. It'd be hard to do something like that at a Microsoft or at a Sun. All right, well, maybe this is a chance to try and build, to do this kind of thing and know that, all right, well, there's actually money to make it happen. So, it was it's that first really that first explosion of .com was really exciting. It was an exciting time to be in the industry. Of course, that turned into something else as those kind of valuations got overinflated, and these companies kind of didn't really have any reasonable business models, and that all kind of collapsed very quickly in a very scary way. But that up that time, you could just imagine, people were getting funded with barely an idea. And there was just so much capital around it, which was, a pretty cool time. A lot of great companies got founded around then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even though it did come to a bit of a head for a lot of them around 2000, I think a lot of those people went on to form other companies, which then become amazing companies as well, didn't they? Because they'd learned from that experience. So, it was an incredible time. It was a revolutionary time, really, because it started everything. It started that culture, which gave birth to Google, Facebook, and all these other companies.
I watched the General Magic documentary last night, and because I was very aware of General Magic was around right as I was joining the industry, and I was very aware of that company. And what I didn't realize, I had known a couple of people in that documentary. I didn't realize how many people I actually knew there, but also how many people out of that failed company ended up, absolutely creating tons of things in the industry and leading a lot of the industry. I've worked for
that documentary. Is it a Netflix one or something? Is it? Or?
It's not Netflix. You can get it off iTunes or Amazon.
Right. Okay. No, I'll have to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, you got to rent it.
I watched that one about the woman who set up the company with the fake blood testing stuff.
Yeah, the Theranos. Yeah,
it was a really good documentary. But wow, shocking behavior.
The book is really good too. It's
I'm told the book is obviously better than the documentary. Just gives you the book in one big.
Yeah.
But that's definitely on my reading list to take a look at that one. So okay. So going back to your sort of your chronology, then I suppose talk us through Adobe then, because you joined Adobe at a quite pivotal time as well, didn't you? That surely in 2004 they were obviously established, but they weren't. Yeah. I think they really pushed on in the late 2000, 2005 onwards, didn't they? And become the sort of behemoth that they are now. Talk us about that experience.
Adobe was a really cool place to join from the perspective that I'd always appreciated their products. I'd used Photoshop in university. I think one of the version 1 or version 2 of Photoshop, and having come out of computer graphics originally, and then being able to go to the place that was doing Photoshop was really cool. So I liked that they had a very different market, right? I've been doing kind of consumer stuff at Microsoft and kind of more advanced research, and then this kind of streaming media, because the startups I went to after Microsoft were more on the streaming media side, went back and on Windows. Now getting to work on creative professional stuff was really neat, and it was a great time. It was right before Adobe bought Macromedia. So Adobe had kind of been in the web and they sort of trying to do web stuff, but really when Macromedia joined, now Adobe not only became a creative professional product company, but also a web company. And the folks from Macromedia had a completely different perspective. I think Adobe at that point, because it was also, the PDF company and the printer driver company and PostScript company. And so while it had this strong footing in Creative Pro, it also had kind of a button-up kind of B2B aspect to it as well. Mm-hmm. And the Macromedia folks brought in this much more dynamic kind of approach to the way they built their products. You had this much stronger tie into the web, and now you started to see all the products kind of really take advantage of the web. It brought in, I think, also a lot more experimentation, a lot more of those kind of ideas. It was a really kind of cool coming together of two companies that really, I think, amplified both their strong points. So it was a great time to be there. Yeah. And I got to work there so I joined in this part of the company called Cortec. So it was the pieces that went into all the other products. And so I was working on GPU. I joined a team and then later became the manager of the team that was originally building GPU and multi-core acceleration for Photoshop and Premiere and After Effects and all these cool things. And later we worked with the Flash team as well. So we also got to participate in all these different products, which was really cool. And then I was there through the transition from very much desktop focus into much more services focus as well, because I was there when the Creative Suite second version, I think, of the Creative Suite launch was right after I joined, and I worked on that up through the last version of the Creative Suite into Creative Cloud. And when I joined, at a certain point, I switched to working on like a brand new consumer set of applications, a whole new product family on the consumer space there in the digital imaging consumer space. But we were one of the first, if not the first, I'm not sure, products that actually was a connected desktop mobile services product at Adobe. And so we were the first one on Amazon and using AWS, and we got to do a lot of this stuff like port the Lightroom core imaging engine onto iOS was something my team did, which is now part of everything, it's now part of all their mobile things as well. So we built the sync engine that is now part of the Creative Suite, Creative Cloud. So that was kind of a cool time to be there, as well as going from sort of this product, like really Creative Pro and kind of B2B company, into really being a web kind of creative company, still with that stuff, into the cloud and connected applications. It was just kind of a really great company to be at during that transition in the industry, but also just fun. It was a fun place to work. It was a great place to work.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I always felt like Adobe took graphic design to the masses a little bit. You didn't have to have a degree in graphic design to be a designer anymore. You could, literally just pick it up. It was just a lot easier, wasn't it? I mean, with the graphic design suite, and all the products that come under that suite, it was just, you could pick it up and be half decent with it within days, couldn't you? You could actually create something with it, very quickly. So, and that wasn't really available before then. Is that fair to say?
It's very much fair to say. I think Adobe was very, very good, not only at kind of understanding that market, but also I think Adobe, as a company, was very smart in that it would also see other products that were emerging in the market, and then when they sort of got that sort of critical place of utility and audience, they would then add them in and tie them in together. So I think it wasn't necessarily that Adobe although Adobe did build good product or does build good products, they were also very, very good at finding products that made sense with theirs and bringing them together so that you could transition from Photoshop to Illustrator to InDesign very, very seamlessly, which made everything a lot easier, made it a lot easier to build that kind of stuff. But it was, there was a good consumer play there, and they still play in that space, but it did make professional quality tools available to a lot of people. Sometimes they stole them, but a lot of times they stole them. Actually, I think a lot more graphic designers, certainly over a certain age, a lot of the graphic designers got into graphic design professionally by stealing Adobe software and then later buying it. That was a pretty strong upgrade path or adoption path for them.
It's kind of like Napster, you kind of with that, but then you start buying it on iTunes. Is just the way it went,
Yeah, absolutely.
Was excited to bring this one up. I think Spotify, great company, based in Sweden, which is a bit random. Yeah. I'm sure you enjoyed going some little holidays over there, but I mean, you did explain it briefly when you were talking about your career history and things, but can we just elaborate on that? Where did this seems very left field to come out of nowhere? Was it just a job offer from a recruiter or something, or was it someone you knew in there, or how did it come about?
No, it was a headhunter. So a headhunter reached out to me. I was at that point 9 years at Adobe. I was coming up on my 10th anniversary and was thinking, I just had lunch with a former manager who was telling me, at a certain point, you become a lifer, right? You got to decide either you need to go soon or you need to just decide you're going to stay at Adobe forever. And so I was kind of thinking about this. I was coming up on my 10-year anniversary. Adobe is a company that does sabbaticals. So I was thinking, okay, well, I'll get to my 10-year, I'll do my sabbatical, and I'll use that time to decide what I want to do next. And meanwhile, this recruiter reached out to me about Spotify. You can see sort of behind me in my office, I have music. I've been a musician forever. I run a record label. I was a general manager of my university radio station. So I'm a music. I worked in streaming media at Microsoft and in startups. So I'm
a massive ABBA fan, Kevin. Is that what you were going to say now?
Yeah, no. It just proximity to the ABBA museum alone was the main reason I needed to go, and being able to run into Roxette on the street.
Oh, wow.
Of course, yeah. No, so music was very much an interest of mine. Spotify, honestly, at the time I joined, it was one of a lot of products, right? So you had Rhapsody locally, Deezer, Spotify, obviously Pandora was actually at that time the big streaming music company. You had a lot of these different companies in the world, and Spotify at that time was just one of them. But what attracted me to Spotify was I thought, it might be interesting I hadn't really talked to companies in Europe before. I've been really a West Coast US kind of tech person. But I knew, I'd worked with people in Europe. But I thought, this might be interesting to just see, and it is in streaming music, which I care about, so I'll talk to them and just see what happens. But as I got to know more about how they did their work, I just became absolutely fascinated with being in that environment and seeing how that actually worked day to day, like what it was like to be there. And so that was what really attracted me to it, more than just the product. And the product was good, but it was, all the products were good, right? It was the product was interesting. Space was interesting, but what really sold me on basically picking up my family and moving to Sweden for 3 years was really just working in this kind of really unique and different way.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, it always felt like a very exciting company, didn't it? I mean,
yeah.
But like you said, there was a hell of a lot of competition around that sort of time that subscription music came about as a concept. Why did they become the market leader? I think it's fit.
Oh yeah.
Didn't they? So why did they emerge then? Why did they emerge and not Deezer or not one of these other companies you mentioned?
So I think there's a few things that Spotify did that has made Spotify so successful. One was, I think Daniel Ek and Martin, the founders of the company, had a very early realization that this was eventually going to be a very big space and that there would only be a few successful companies. And so they went very early on from the scale up as fast as possible, right? So a lot of companies do that and absolutely fail. They did that and were successful because they were able to scale out and deliver things faster than any of the competition, and still do. So I think that was one critical aspect. Two was they also came in one of the benefits of them being in Sweden was that they were the Swedish music industry was completely dying because of piracy primarily, right? And was desperate. And so they were able to get these amazing licenses, right? Spotify is one of the only companies now with a free tier, right? So you can use Spotify without having to pay for it. They are a freemium model, and they were the ones who were able to build that model with the Swedish music industry because the Swedish music industry was desperate. So they were able to get these pretty good licensing agreements that no one else was able to get, that made the product also really easy to try and very compelling to get people onto the platform. And then third, I think, is the part about where they were able to deliver value faster. So they took an extremely lean approach, meaning like we were constantly putting experiments into the field. Like if you're a developer at the company and you have access to the product with all the different flags, all the different experiments, and you can turn them on and off, like you can have a completely different experience. Every one of Spotify's customers is potentially having a different experience. At one point, somebody on my team, because I was responsible for the core product, somebody on my team looked at all the different flags and did all the math to figure out there were, I think, somewhere like 600 million permutations of the Android app that could be live at any time, meaning that we had 6 times as many permutations as we had actual users, right? Just experiments running in the field. And that was because we took a very quick, we have a good idea, let's put it out, see if it works. If it works, let's build on it. If it doesn't, let's yank it. And that approach, just constant innovation, made it impossible for anybody else to compete because they just couldn't keep up. And and so that's where a lot of things that really kind of catapulted, especially when Apple came out, and Apple was the big scary kind of company because they were already so deep in this space. But Spotify could just out innovate Apple just by constant delivery and trying new ideas and putting them out and testing them. Whereas Apple took a much more kind of less frequent delivery, kind of much more, we know what people want. When they were wrong, when they're right, they're awesome. When they're wrong, that's horrible. But if somebody else is moving faster, they just can't compete.
So Apple had more of a pay-as-you-go model, didn't they? Is that
Apple? Yeah.
Download songs and things, whereas Spotify got into subscription model really quick.
Yeah.
Apple did, obviously. And then were Apple a bit sluggish to respond to that? Because that's
so Apple. Yeah. Apple had really done an amazing job of taking this sort of physical sales and transforming them into digital sales, and done that very, very well. But then when it was time to go, when digital sales were transforming to subscriptions, Apple took forever to make that transition.
Yeah.
And so, Spotify was already growing and growing at a very fast pace when Apple decided it was time to move into that space. But then they took a very different approach where they came from a curation first and curation only. Like, we know what you like. We're going to present you with hand curated playlist of music you will like. And Spotify came at it much more from a, well, yeah, we got those, but that was a smaller part. We're really going to do much more with machine learning and recommendation systems, and bring it. Everybody, Spotify is different than everybody else. It's very unique to them. And so it came less from a, we know what you want because we are the ones who know music, to, we know what you want because we know what you like and we know what other people like. And so we're going to give you stuff that you like, not because we're telling you to like it, but because we know you like it. And so that ended up being a massively stark difference. And it also was, Apple didn't have a free tier. Apple couldn't negotiate a free tier, partially because the industry was worried that Apple was going to cannibalize all this great kind of music retail that they'd done. And so now Apple's much more embraced algorithmic, and Spotify's got much more, got a nice mix of algorithmic and curation, but you still have some differences around licensing, but also differences around kind of fundamental approaches that still kind of define these as very different products.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was an interesting time. I think obviously Amazon got into it then, and it's probably those three are the big players in this space now, aren't they? But but anyway, let's fast forward then to your, obviously you left there in 2016 and worked it with a couple of organizations, startups and so on and so forth. And then you joined Onfido in April of last year, yeah?
Yes.
London-based, I believe it was set up by three students from Oxford, or went to university in Oxford. And it's something totally different to what you've done, to anything you've done before. But talk us through that decision to join Onfido and what you're doing, and a little bit about the company.
What's interesting, if you look at all the different places I've worked, it seems weirdly random in some ways, right? I started in graphics. At my Microsoft research, I was really doing graphics, but then I kind of transitioned to streaming media, then did streaming media startups, then came back, worked on the Windows team, building like core OS pieces, then went to do creative professional software, then did consumer-focused streaming music software, then did legal tech, kind of marketplace software, then did edutech, kind of marketplace software, and now, regutech or fintech. But there is actually a through line through each of these. So one, I think some of what attracts me to a new role is actually the ability to learn and to do something new. I'm not necessarily always interested in just repeating what I've done before. And certainly after I left Spotify, a lot of companies were approaching me to do streaming music stuff. And I kind of felt like, well, I've just done that. Like, if you want me to come, you want me to just redo what I just did. I kind of know that playbook where you are. I'm just going to come and take all the good ideas I learned from Spotify. So it wasn't really that attractive to me. But this idea of like, oh, here's a space I know of, but I don't really know, and I get to learn that space, but also a very different business. It's the same thing with Onfido, where the problems that they're trying to solve as a company are really cool and really hard problems, both from a kind of problem to solve, but also from a technology problem. But it also actually does kind of go back to what I've done before, because a lot of what we do at Onfido is computer vision, which I have a good background in because I spent a lot of years doing graphics and signal processing, and then also machine learning, because essentially we are looking at documents, government documents, and people, and trying to decide if this document is a valid, real document or a fraudulent document, and is this person actually alive, and actually in front of the camera. And because of this, that ties into a lot of what I did, both in at Microsoft Research and at Spotify, and at Adobe. Like, we look at things like fonts, and is this the correct font for this document? And being able to actually talk at a deep level about fonts, because I worked at Adobe for so long, like, that's actually really useful in this job. So I like those aspects to it, and the mission of the company is great. Helping people protect their identities, helping companies avoid fraud, is certainly something that resonates with me. So yeah, it's a little bit different, but it's also kind of, it lets me build on things I've done before, but then take it to a new place, which I like a lot.
So give us this sort of elevator pitch or the showcase, the succinct showcase of the product. Is
Sure.
leveraging AI, you're leveraging AI technology to provide, to solve the issue around identity, aren't you? So it's digital identity. So sorry, I probably just butchered that, but correct me.
No, but it's not, you didn't butcher it too much. I mean, so it's the idea of helping you claim your real identity, proving that it is uniquely you that is talking to whomever you're talking to. So from a perspective of you as a person, this is I don't have to go to a bank branch, or I don't have to go to stand in front of someone, hand them my passport or hand them my driver's license, have them look at me, have them look at the document and go, okay, yeah, you're this person. I can do that from my home. I took a train, I went to Cambridge for the day to go to the Raspberry Pi store. And I came back and I was sitting next to somebody on a train, and he's with his phone. He's just taking a picture of his ID. And it turned out he was signing up for Barclays, which is one of our customers. He was using our product, but he could do that on the train, sign up for a new account because of this technology. So one, it's about convenience for people, which now turned out to be really important these days, being able to do that at a distance. But it also for businesses, to prevent someone stealing your identity and opening an account in your name and either ruining your credit or stealing money from you. You have attacks where people will pretend to be you, call up, get your password changed, get access to your account, and still take money out of your account. Having this, what we call IDV or ID verification step in there, is a massive preventer for fraud. So what we do as a company is we work with banks or travel companies or gaming or lots of different industries where they need to actually validate the person that is talking to them is the actual person. Yeah. So we do that by primarily we'll work with your passport or your driver's license or some other government issued ID. You take a picture of it. We look at the picture. We make sure it's a valid document. And then you'll take a picture or a video of yourself, and then we prove that you are that person that's on the document. The document's valid. You're the person that's on the document, and you are actually you. You're not wearing a mask, which is some people do. You're not showing a picture of a person, which some people do. You're not taking a picture of a screen capture, which some people do. There's all these different kind of frauds. And the cool part about this, we do it with machine learning. We do it with computer vision. It's in itself, it's a really hard problem, right? Because it's a real document. It's different from something necessarily like automated driving or something like that, because the value in fraud is so high that the people trying to commit fraud are becoming incredibly sophisticated. So they're using machine learning models, they're using GANs, they're using really sophisticated image processing to try and trick us, and then we're trying to always stay ahead of them. So it's not that we just solved the problem and the problem's solved, it's the problem is continually evolving.
Yeah. No,
it makes it really kind of an interesting problem to solve.
It's like an arms race, isn't it?
It's absolutely an arms race, yeah, totally.
I actually I've used your product. I've got a Revolut account.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize that was you guys. I didn't realize that was your customer. But I remember I signed up a while back to buy some cryptocurrency. Actually, that's why I had a traditional bank account. I thought, they stopped me buying cryptocurrency, so I got a Revolut account for that purpose. And I forgot about the verification process. But recently, it said you've got to you've got to tell us who you are again, prove who you are again. And I was like, oh, what a pain. So I did it in it was so seamless, it was really easy to do it. And so I gave you a 5-star review on Trustpilot. But
thank you. All right.
I did. Thank you very much. I would have if I'd remembered. But
feel free to do that at any time.
No, but I think it's a really, as frustrating as it is to to have to prove who you are again, you have to, for the reasons you pointed out. It is an arms race. Cybersecurity is a big issue these days, and I can imagine that you're getting a lot of traction with this product.
Absolutely. It's also sort of an interesting perspective. Yeah, just even our own cybersecurity, obviously we're an interesting target because of all the personal data that we manage and making sure we're also continuously protecting our own network and our customers, but then also from privacy perspective, we're trying to be sort of one of the leaders on protecting people's privacy as well, because that's an important part of the trust. So that makes the job interesting. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. How heavily involved are you in the security side then? Do you is that your remit? Are you are you like a CISO as well as a CTO, or you?
Yeah, no, we have a director of director of security. We also have a director of privacy, but we have a director of security that reports to me. I am ultimately responsible for security as well. Yeah. So yeah.
I'm assuming you've seen a lot of development over the years in terms of how sophisticated these hackers are and things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What are you seeing in the future? Well, what is it? Anything that scares you that you're thinking, well, this is a problem if we don't, sort of get a handle on this?
I think the things that are currently kind of scariest to me right now, just looking ahead, is we've been talking about this for a little bit in this space, but quantum computing as a way of kind of breaking through encryption is a very scary idea to me. It's certainly something, it's always nascent, it's always on the horizon, but at some point that horizon is coming closer. So that's something that scares me, is that whatever encryption we have, and we can keep adding more bits to it, but it's eventually going to not be enough. That's something that's scary to me. Machine learning as applied to hacks is also something that's interesting to me. To an extent, a lot of what we do now a lot of our security uses machine learning to identify kind of unusual patterns that we may not see just looking through logs or our normal alerting. But again, just because we see it on the fraud side, where we see really more and more sophistication coming from fraudsters who do this for a living. Same with the hackers. They're doing this for a living, and some of them have access. I mean, they have access to all the same, tools that everyone has now, either through GCP and AWS and those kinds of things. And so they can get access to really sophisticated tools if they're smart enough to really take advantage of them. That's the other thing I worry about, is that they figure ways to kind of evade our detection mechanisms using some sophisticated tools. That's what I worry about as well.
Yeah. I want to come back to your point on quantum computing. I was reading a piece recently about, I think Google said they achieved quantum supremacy. In terms of there was some maths problem which apparently would take the strongest, the most powerful computer in the world 10,000 years to solve, and a quantum computer could solve it in 200 hours or something, or 200. Right. It was ridiculous how much faster it was than normal computing power. Is that, well, first of all, are Google actually telling the truth? And B, is quantum computing achievable and possible in our lifetimes?
Is Google telling the truth? Well, I can't. All right, what I can say is Google is not necessarily has any particularly good reason to lie, but they may define their terms slightly differently than the rest of us. So
I would never use the word lie. Sorry, I should.
Yeah, all right.
Is it true quantum computing what they're explaining for someone who knows this world better than what I'm positioning here? I
would say it is quantum computing, I guess. What is true quantum computing? I don't know if we'll get to that in our lifetime, but I think we'll certainly be able to capture some of, by using quantum computing techniques, which is what I think Google did. Yeah. We'll be able to achieve much more magnitude of computing scale than we have previously. As I said, one of the things I worked on at Adobe was GPU and HPC. And one of the things I worked on that team, or we did on that team, was start to think about what would we do with kind of supercomputing level talent. If Adobe could put together, 10,000 GPUs in a data center, and we wanted to throw that at people's After Effects or whatever, what could we do to scale out that level of compute? So we're starting to look at much larger scale compute. Everything that we were looking at is completely dwarfed. At the biggest supercomputers that we were talking about, a decade ago, to where we're going, even just now taking advantage of some of the quantum computing ideas and techniques, completely dwarfs all that stuff. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this applies, and if you really get into the world where we're starting to have Microsoft or IBM, or have this in a public cloud thing you can pay for to throw problems at, right? Which will also simplify the programming of it, which is one of the harder parts. Being able to understand and build quantum systems is very, very challenging, as those techniques become more available, the programming models will get simpler, the availability will get easier. You'll be able to buy it by the hour, just like you do any other compute resource now. And I think that's going to fundamentally change the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's useful to you, but you don't even have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump onto this one then, because this is something obviously we have to talk about. We're in the midst of a lockdown at the moment. I think the US is got a real sort of rise in COVID-19 cases over the last couple of weeks. The UK is in a similar position. It's a time at the right now. I mean, we really, in terms of being a leader and all that kind of thing, you've got a team yourself. Leadership to a team and things like that. What are you doing to keep your team motivated, to keep them productive and sort of engaged in what you guys in the bigger vision of what you want to achieve from an engineering perspective, I suppose, in your case, but also from a strategic perspective as well? What are you doing? How are you coping with the current situation, Kevin?
So I think one of the things that was sort of critical, we were already a distributed organization, not necessarily fully distributed, but my team was already in, primarily in London, but also a large part of my team's in Lisbon. I've got a team in Albuquerque, then individuals in Paris and Singapore and San Francisco and all over the place. So we were already like kind of a distributed team and used to some of those aspects. What makes this time different is understanding the broader context and not expecting us to be work as usual, right? That was, I think, a critical thing for us, was to acknowledge, even folks who are generally good, who generally work from home, now they work from home, but they got their kids there. They got their spouse there. They can't leave, right? So even for the people who are used to working from home, they are under a lot more stress than they normally are. So a lot of it is acknowledging that with the team and saying, we understand that's happening. And we're not going to expect you to work as normal. This is not normal. That said, us partially because of our business, we're sort of in a unique place right now where we've been able to actually be helpful in this place where normally we have a great mission, but now it can tie it into direct events. So a big part of what we did early on, right as this hit, Tesco was hiring a ton of people because they wanted to support. They had to support all the people and delivering food and all this kind of stuff. We work with Tesco, and so we had a massive influx of that from Tesco, where we could relate what we were doing directly towards helping people in this crisis, which really magnified our mission and brought it and made it a lot more plain, which also was really motivating, obviously, to people. It wasn't just, okay, well, we make software and we're continuing to make software and we need to stay motivated. But it was like, oh, we can actually be part of helping in this. Part of it is acknowledging business isn't business as usual, and we have to adjust to things, and we have to be respectful and understand people's situations. Part of it was having this real tie into how is what we do related to what's going on, and how can we actually feel like we're contributing as opposed to just kind of running our business like normal. And then I think part of it is figuring out ways to keep the human connection, which is just a common problem when you have a real distributed team. You kind of lose that human connection when you're not standing next to each other waiting to get coffee, or bump into each other on the walking between desks. Is trying to figure out ways to bring that, and we do that through stuff a lot of companies maybe do. Like we do pub quizzes together, virtual pub quizzes. We find ways to kind of be human with each other and not just be one-on-one business meeting. I probably spend a lot more of my kind of conversation time over video talking about kind of personal stuff today than I normally would when I just see people and in the morning say, oh, did you watch the match or whatever. So that's some of the things that we've been doing. It's a difficult time, and you got to just acknowledge it's going to be a difficult time for a while. So just do the best you can with people. So,
Kevin, you're a very experienced leader. You're experienced working with startups, things like that. You're in a very difficult situation. There's a lot of less experienced entrepreneurs and things out there who are trying to keep motivated and things. What advice would you give to these sort of SME business leaders who are trying to engage and keep their teams productive through this difficult period?
I think one thing, especially in technology, I think one thing that really struck me was, as this has rolled on, you expect it will be a tough time economically for a lot of businesses, restaurants, and those kinds of things. What you started to see actually relatively early on was actually it affecting technology companies, obviously startups that were building things for travel or those kind of things, but even lots of other companies as well. So one thing I would tell folks who are in that place where they're in a small or medium-sized business, but are doing fine, is to be aware that the people that work for you, even though they may feel secure normally, they may be feeling really insecure at this time. And the best thing you can do is to give them a broader sense of security, be hyper transparent about what's going on, be available to them, to your teams, so that they get a sense that they know what's happening, they're comfortable with what's happening, they know they have access to you if they need it, you're there for them as a leader. As a business goes, be hyper aware of the larger kind of economic situation, right? And understand. I think when it started, I came to the U.S. to be with my family because there made no sense for me to be quarantining in an apartment in London. But I cleared out a lot of food, but there's stuff that's going to expire in August. I said, when I left, I said, well, that'll be fine. I'll be back by August, of course. I'm not so sure now, right? So be aware that while it may feel like things are getting better, it's really unclear yet where things are. Be hyper aware of your money, your money reserves, where you have access to money. If your business is doing well in this, this is a great time if you can. There might be an opportunity in this kind of chaos to find a new business or find a new line of business or something like that. But also keep an eye on your cash reserves if you can be protecting them or even growing them a little bit, because we don't know when this will end. And so that's, I think, an important part for anybody that's running a small or mid-sized business. If you're doing well in this, that's great. Keep an eye on your reserves. If you're not doing so well in this, very much keep an eye on your reserves and start thinking about what you may need to do, and do it early, but be very transparent for the people that work for you.
That's fantastic advice, Kevin. Really appreciate that. I just want to finish on this one. Obviously, yourself, you've been in quarantine now for some time. What do you do?
Yeah.
Actives, keep a structure to your day. Obviously, you're into your music. I'm assuming you play instruments.
I'm sorry?
You play the guitar, yeah? I can see a few guitars.
I'm primarily a bass player, but I also play guitar, piano, cello, lots of stuff. Yeah.
What have you been doing to keep sane during this lockdown?
I think I'm doing the same as a lot of people. Netflix plus, play music, go for walks with the family. I think my day is a little bit different, especially because I am primarily working with teams in London. So I wake up now super early to start my day very early, which means it feels like I have much longer days than I normally would, which gives me time. I feel like I've had more time to work on personal programming projects or play music or do those and spend time with the family. So I just, do whatever I need to do to keep sane. We all have to do that, I think. But I have found, for myself, I go, part of the reason we came back here is access. There's woods right by our house. And so I can go for a walk in the woods and not see anyone, not have to worry about social distancing. And that is incredibly grounding. Yeah. When you feel like you haven't left a building in a week. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's de-stressing as well. When you've been in front of a screen all day, it's good to just walk in the woods or something, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, Kevin, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure our listeners will take lots of value from it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.